G'day everybody, Nick Dingle here again for another VB.NET 2013 GUI video. Ever since we began working with Windows Form applications, there are a couple of settings that have become available to us that weren't available in the console-based programs. And I wanted to make this short little video to demonstrate some of those settings and some of the things that you can use in your future projects. So what I'm going to do is just quickly create a blank Windows Form application. And this entire video is focused around the My Project section. Alright? Now I'm only going to go through the Preferences page. I'm not going to go through all the different tabs underneath this. So I'm just going to double click on My Project, which is going to open up my project settings. And just to emphasize, I'm not going to go through all these different settings down here. I might in a future video, but right now I'm just going to look at the settings on this page and emphasize to you what these different settings mean. So first of all, we get asked what an assembly name and a root namespace name. Okay? What these are is when you make your application into an executable form, also known as an exe file in Windows, this is the name of that file. So for example, if you are making a point of sale system, okay, you would change that to whatever you want to call it. Okay? For example, let me just go Poodles. Alright? And if I hit start, it's going to turn it into an executable file. And close that down. I'm going to open up the folder where that exists. So it should be Documents, 2013, Projects, it was Application 4. And let's go digging into the debug folder. And there's my Poodles. So that there is why you would change the assembly name. Okay, it's never that nice to release an application called Windows Application 4. That's pretty bad. Now the next one, root namespace. You're probably never ever going to have to change this, and you're probably never ever going to see this. But what this is a name in which all of your code lives underneath. So for example, if I type in Poodles again for the namespace, okay, understand naming conventions apply here, so spaces, special characters, leave them out. The root namespace is where all of your objects, your classes, and your code live. So what that means is if you create a library of code, a number of functions and subs that other people can use, they would actually have to type in your root namespace before the function name. So for example, if I had a sub called add, then another person would have to type in poodles.add to access my function. Okay? Or at the very least, they would have to import my namespace Poodles. Now I have never talked about importing namespaces before, and I'm not going to start now. But basically, as we move along, let's have a look at the target framework. Now, right now, the most recent version is 4.5.1. What this is a collection of libraries and code and objects that Microsoft has built that you can use across the entire Visual Studio suite. So that means if you start programming in Visual Basic and you're using an object that allows you to download web pages, when you go to C# or if you go to C++, you can use the exact same library. Okay, and that's the whole idea of the .NET framework, is it's flexible and it goes across all. Okay, looking at the next one, application type, Windows Form application, we've got class, library, and console application. If we had a different version of Visual Studio other than Express, we'd have more options here, but we've only got the 3 because we're in Express. So we've all used console applications and we're used to them. Class library, however, is like a project which just consists of code, subs, functions, and classes. And you let other people utilize your code. That's when I was talking about this root namespace business. Now, if that doesn't make sense, don't stress. We're not going to worry about it today. One of probably the most important properties that you're going to have to pay attention to from now on is this startup form. Okay, by default, you only start with one form. You can easily add more forms, and I'll show you that in the next video. But right now, you can actually change, you can't change this because we've only got one form. If you had another form that you wanted to be the first form that opens up, this is where you change that setting. Okay, you just simply click on Form 2, or whatever you might have named it. All right, over here is a pretty interesting one, the icon for your program. Okay, you can actually change what your executable file looks like. So if you want to do that, you click on the drop down, you click Browse, and you go and find an ICO file or an icon file. All right. By default, I don't really know where mine are. Okay, I probably have a couple that are lying around in certain folders, but I'm not going to go searching today. I'm going to leave it be. But what it would do is actually change the icon of your executable file. Okay, so sometimes it's really professional to change that up. All right, moving along, the assembly information. Now this is just like detailed information about your program. Okay, what's the title? What's the description? What's the Poddles? Good job. What's the company? Okay, what's the product? Copyright, trademark, and so forth and so forth and so forth. Okay, some of these you probably will never ever have to touch. Let me just click OK for the moment, and let me show you where you find this information. If I come back to the debug again, now let me start the program to recompile it. Let's come back to debug. It lives inside the executable file, that assembly information. So if I right click and go to properties and go to details, there's all the stuff that I just typed in. Okay, there's heaps of them, and you can change anything you want. You just see product version and file version were in there as well, and so forth. Okay, moving along down here, I'm going to leave this ticked. Enable XP visuals. So do you want the pretty buttons, the pretty drop downs? Do you want the pretty border around your form? Okay, if you untick that, you're going to get rough as guts Windows 2098 style windows. Okay, the next one is really interesting, and it's really, this setting is based on what kind of program you're making. But the idea is, do you want your program to be able to be opened more than one time? So can we open a second instance or a second version of your program at the same time? Or if you tick it, it means that only one version of your application can run at the exact same time. So they can't open a second, a third instance, and so forth. Now, there might be instances where your program can use this setting and quite effectively. However, normal programs, I can't see why you'd limit that. Okay, I'm going to skip this guy here, and we're going to look at shutdown mode. Now, shutdown mode is when your program turns off. In the console program, it's when we hit the last line of code. From now, we don't have a last line of code because the user's in control. And so what happens is when a form closes, that's what triggers the shutdown of your program. And there's two ways your program can shut down. You can see the first one. When the startup form closes, which would be form 1, the whole program shuts down. So it doesn't matter how many forms you got open. You could have 10 forms. As soon as that form 1 gets closed, the entire program is going to shut down as well. Sometimes that's not a good idea. That's a really good setting for programs like Microsoft Word, where you might have lots of little overlay windows or toolbars, and then when you close the main form, everything else shuts down with it. So that's an understandable setting. Another time, or most other times I've seen, your program, you have multiple forms in your program, and you sort of progress through them, and when all of them close, you want it to shut down. So you would choose when last form closes. Okay. Again, it's based on what kind of program you're making for that one. And splash screen. Splash screen is when you start up, let's say, Microsoft Word, that little blue bar that you just saw pop up, that was a splash screen. Okay, so if you have a form in your program that you want it to be a splash screen, you'd simply add it in there. Okay, and I'll show you that in a future video as well. Now, that was a quick run through of the My Project settings, okay, just the applications one anyway. If you have any questions, pop them down in the comments section there. Anyway, I'll see you in the next video. We're going to focus on forms and get into the nitty-gritty. So, thanks for watching, everybody. See you later.